If you have been conducting yourself as a political judge, that is, political judges will be treated politically. They will hold their office coterminous with those of the politicians. That's according to the Member of Parliament for Medina, Francis Xavier Sosu, who is also a lawyer. Question: why should this statement attract condemnation from his own guild, the Ghana Bar Association? Why should this statement threaten his license as a practicing lawyer? In the eye of the storm, is this a new reality or acts in contempt of the judges? A number of journalists are facing prosecution for saying things that have been condemned. Are these prosecutions the reintroduction of criminal libel? And is this the result of a lack of regulation? These are the issues we are canvassing for you. Burden share. Stop the corruption you smell and see. The Constitution in Article 286 prohibits illicit acquisition of wealth by public officers. It commands forfeiture and confiscation of such assets which cannot be traced to income, gifts, loan, inheritance of earning very little, and have no other legitimate sources of income, can afford $140,000 private V8 vehicles. They can build mansions. They or their related businesses within one term, 4-year political cycle. Those who appointed them with full knowledge of their previous and current circumstances pretend not to smell or see the daylight thievery. One most effective way to check the petty and grand corruption is to activate and expand this law on unexplained wealth with clear rules. Those who claim to fight corruption have always known this. Let them act. It is refreshing to hear Professor Stephen Adair declare that, quote, anyone in authority who says he wants evidence on corruption is blind, unquote. We in Ghana, in Africa, sure need a big coup on public corruption to save this country. Listen to compel to act with integrity, first by yourself, and then demand better commitment to protecting the public purse.
Corruption is a vile disease that sucks and drains the health out of something good. Corruption is a virus. It's so potent it leaves its host sick, lethargic, and unable to realize and accomplish all that a well person can. Where corruption thrives, poverty and not prosperity thrives. Wealth is grabbed into the greedy, grubby hands of those who get fat on the toil and labor of good people. Corruption benefits only temporarily those who participate in it. Everyone is on. You need to know that a corrupt person is stealing from you. Corruption is filthy work and despicable acts of treachery done under the table and behind closed doors. Corruption is a disgusting shame. Corruption keeps a nation back from true development and from progress. Wise investors steer clear of a corrupt environment. They would rather put their resources into a place where the playing field of opportunity is equal for all. How many wonderful development projects have been lost because the investors didn't want to do business in a swamp of evil? When those great projects go to another nation or to some other place, we all lose. Believe me when I tell you that corruption steals from you, it steals from all of us. Corruption plunders the nation's wealth. Corrupt people compromise on truth, equity, and fairness, choosing instead to feed off the short-term benefits of crookedness, exploitation, and financial perversion. Corruption is not just a personal matter, it's a culture. It's a way of life, not just for individual people, but for nations in order to take over the assets of the nation that they've invested into. They will provide financial loans to a nation for the much needed infrastructure, and they will do it with assets that they provide. They will sign contracts by lining the pockets of rotten government officials who participate in this kind of corruption and are then held hostage by their own deceit and greed. Corruption is nothing less than a form of theft and national robbery. A corrupt person steals from everyone in society. We all lose when corruption is rampant. Those who participate in corruption have chosen evil over good, lies over truth, and personal gain over well-being of all. To be corrupt means to be rotten. When meat is corrupt, it's rotten, and it's place in the community. A corrupt person should be jailed in order to protect society from the vile deeds of the corrupt person. Government should be protecting us from the foul results of corruption instead of being the proponents and participants in corruption. When corruption is systemic, when it's a culture and a way of life, when corruption thrives, it destroys the health of the community and nation. Now let me tell you, some people says. People who love money will do almost anything to get it. Those who choose to stand up against corruption, you need to know that we're going to be involved in a war. We will be threatened, vilified, intimidated, marginalized, and ridiculed. These kind of people who stand up against corruption will often feel alone, as if they are and decide to do something about it. Africa needs to raise up a new generation of corrupt-free young people who together and in support of one another build a beautiful, new, corrupt-free Africa. We need a new generation of young people to fill the places of leadership who think differently and are motivated not by greed, but a genuine sense of servanthood to the people of our community. The church exists to call the nation back to righteousness. We are here to lift the standard of good that God requires for prosperity and health to flourish across the land.
You can do something about corruption. Act with integrity first. And that's my take. And the show is brought to you by the candid sponsorship of Bank of Africa, as strong as a group and close as a partner. MTN Services, your comprehensive eye care services provider for 31 solid years. Waylead Properties, home is where one starts. CBG, we stand with you. Edlum Housing, where spacious homes cost less. Duraplast, where Duraplast goes, water flows. And Rehoboth Properties, quality housing for all. Cases of free speech and press criminalized by lack of regulation, political judges in the eye of the storm, new reality, or acts in contempt of the judges. We'll be right back. And here on Newsfile, we put Ghana first. Now, in our very first segment, we're dealing with the question of free press and speech. What are the boundaries? Or there are no boundaries, there are no limitations at all. Well, if there are excesses, so, right. And we have the best to help us in dealing with this issue. And here in the studio, Professor Audrey Gajepo, professor at the Department of Communication Studies, University of Ghana. He's joined by George Sapong, Executive Secretary all over the globe on these questions of speech, media, and regulation. Good morning, and welcome to Newsfile.
Good morning, and thank you for having us.
Great. Joining us by Zoom, Kofi Bento, lawyer and senior vice president, Imani Africa. Kofi, thank you for the moment. We'll deal with the questions of quote-unquote political judges. And let's go straight. We also have joining us Pemka, Joseph Dindiok Pemka, who is former Deputy Attorney General and Minister for Justice. Pemka, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Samson.
Great. All right. Suffered at the hands of the police, but you say the state for their comments that have been deemed to violate the law. Let me take you through a small slide that we have, and in which we have a number of journalists. At the start of the year, as in 2021, we had similar situations with journalists, infracting the law, so to speak, and being prosecuted. And then this year begins on a note where there are just quite too many as the... All right, so you are familiar with Oliver Barker-Vormawor, who's been charged with treason felony. His arrest follows a comment he made on Facebook. And what did he say? He said, if this e-levy passes after this cake BS, I will do the coup myself. Useless army. So that's a matter of speech. We understood that he said, had cautioned him and taken his statement on some offensive conduct, one of the laws that we are going to be dealing with this morning. But later, surprisingly, charged him with treason felony. There are people who have also suffered this particular charge of treason felony. Kennedy Japan in April 2012, Kokwa Idaho in 2018. Of course, we know the outcome of these matters. Are facing charges of false news, publication of false news, and offensive conduct. There are two journalists, and then we have one journalist who was slapped with contempt by the Attorney General and is presently serving a 14-day sentence. He is Oheniba Buama Beni. He was dragged 8 Supreme Court judges to influence their decision in the 2020 electoral election petition, of course, without any evidence whatsoever. So he got convicted for contempt. Oheniba is with the station Power FM, clearly aligned to the opposition NDC, and he's been in prison for 14 days, and he paid a fine of 3,000. There's also a CSO person who, for those relatives, used the presidential jet on a shopping spree in the United Kingdom, absolutely without any basis, no evidence whatsoever. His attention was drawn to it. He came out to apologize. Was that enough? Well, he is facing the charge of publication of false news and offensive conduct conducive to the breach of the peace. He's been granted bail in the sum of 50,000 Ghana cedis. He works with the group known as SEPA. Then we have Bobie Ansa, Kwabena Bobie Ansa. He, according to the FAC of Wado and the second lady, Mrs. Samira Baumia, of giving themselves state lands at AU Village around the Kotoka International Airport for construction of the Rebecca Foundation. He was doing a show in the night. Right after that, he was accosted, and he has been charged. He's with Accra FM, also clearly affiliated. He is charged with publication of false news and offensive conduct conducive to breach of the peace. He's been granted bail in the sum of 50,000, and the case has been adjourned to March. Increase in the use of criminal law to punish for speech. So what is going on and what can be done? Let's listen to the Speaker of Parliament and then get our guests to speak to us.
And I don't know how our police CIDs were trained. That arrest that citizen. I don't know where they got that law from. You invite the citizen, and the citizen will voluntarily appear before you, you start investigation. It's when the citizen is refusing and failing that the citizen wants to escape from the ambit of the law that you can proceed to arrest the citizen. There are some heinous crimes that you can also proceed to arrest. But allegations of misreporting, allegations person hijack the person by the trousers and gall the person into cells, that belongs to yesteryears, not today. Oftentimes, in our quest as journalists to disseminate the information you have in a timely manner, to beat the deadline set for. Our information at times do not turn out to be entirely accurate. We end up making some misrepresentations, at times impinging on the integrity and reputation of others. The media space and Ghana's legal regime for the media anticipated this of this challenge. That is why we have the National Media Commission, and Parliament will need to focus on the National Media Commission. We need to urgently revise the law on the Media Commission to add some teeth and resources for the Commission to be effective. It's because of this so many laws on media and free speech. As a lawyer myself, in the early days of my practice and also my parliamentary life, I was compelled to take a number of media houses to court.
So that is the Speaker of Parliament, Abam Sumana Bagbing. Is the police using the rule of man presently? What is going on? Professor Audrey Gajipo, what's your observation about what we have witnessed leading us to this discussion?
Okay. Thank you, Samson. I don't even know where to start from that. So many that you've aligned with the journalists. And I like to say that not all the cases are exactly the same. There are nuances in the cases that we need to unpack. However, I see two things happening. There is a crisis in journalism, I think, and nuances. I mean, the examples you gave me, some of them didn't appear to me to be misreporting, as the speaker alluded to. It's what would fall into the category of disinformation, deliberately fabricating without any evidence. And we know that journalism or even, so there's that happening in our media landscape, in traditional media, in social media. On the other hand, there is the question, again, the speaker alluded to it, on how to deal with journalists or individuals who use the media in irresponsible ways or in it's malicious and deliberate. And that's where the police come in. That's the concern about laws like causing fear and panic, and recently false news, publication of false news. And I think that the speaker is right in the fact that we could use other means to sanction. Has used the court, civil libel, right, to get justice when he felt defamed. And I think that's important to focus on. For example, in the Bobby Ansah case that you showed, I struggle to see why the police should come into this plea, libeled or defamed the First Lady and the Second Lady, and they are entitled to defend their reputations. It's very important. Okay? However, they ought to defend it through other means by the police. This is not treason. This is not treasonable. This is not around looking for false news that is published in our newspapers, in broadcast. That's not their job. So this particular issue should have been brought to the attention and reported to the Media Commission. And again, the Speaker talked about the Media Commission as a route, and it's true that the... But it should be...
That's a very regular accusation they suffer.
Yes.
Yeah.
It should be reported. I would say that's a typical occasion in which it should have been reported to the Media Commission. One. And or else it could have been a subject of civil libel. Not in a democracy where free speech is important. What it does is it does have a chilling effect. It doesn't matter that you have a case. It doesn't matter that the speech was false. It has to sometimes to take on the powerful and the power elite, to say things that may be uncomfortable for us. In fact, to even sometimes in doing that make errors. Not deliberate, is whether there's malice. If there's no malice, then you know that it has to be forgiven, especially if the journalists retract what they're saying and offer an apology, then in a democratic dispensation is deemed as sufficient.
The Bible says a good name is better than riches. If you defame somebody, we know that even if a court vindicates you that you are right, your reputation doesn't get as repaired. Where NMC, all they can do, perhaps, is to ask you to retract and apologize. The question is that many of these journalists, the errant ones, who are doing what you say malicious and deliberate rather than misreporting, who are dealing with facts that are easily verifiable but will not verify, are not perturbed. They are not threatened by NMC sanctions. So what should we do?
You're right. They're not to do, but they also have available, people have available civil libel. So you can sue, excuse me to say, the pants off of somebody, okay? So you can sue and have your reputation restored. And in fact, a lot of people have sued, and that's a way of vindicating your reputation. But you see, if you have the person in prison, it's not going to do any more restoration of your reputation than if you sue the person in civil court. How is the money for what the person has said against you? The important issue is for it to be established in the public sphere as robustly as possible that what the person said about you is untrue, for which you deserve an apology and you deserve compensation if you went to civil court. Now, it's important that we don't criminalize, because we crossed that bridge in 2001 when criminal libel was repealed. Ghana, the atmosphere was pretty much the same. You know, there were journalists who were deliberately distorting facts, particularly against politicians in 2001, as they are now. But we made a decision as a nation. The nation supported the new Kufuor government to repeal the criminal libel law. So we don't need to...
I'll return to that, and for us to answer the question whether or not we are now asking for sections 207 and 208 of the Criminal and Other Offences Act, which is the law in Ghana, to be repealed, because those laws exist. These are the laws that the police have used against charlatanic prophecies And we have all applauded the police. We'd never accuse them in the way we are doing because it affects us now as the 2008 in our Electronic Communications Act to still criminalize false communication. Yes, so you are the regulator and you train journalists also. You started from this place. What do you see and what do you say?
Okay. Thank you very much, Samson. I think my mask is particularly me too. Okay. So, Samson, thank you very much for this opportunity. I just realized I've not been here in about 6 or so years.
Yes.
And I'm grateful.
But I hosted you last year on the Law Show.
Yes.
We're dealing with similar situations.
Yeah. And I was offshore, so.
Right.
But we need to have the modesty and the humility to tell the truth. And what is the truth as I see? What we are seeing today didn't start from today. It is part of a long continuum. Austin. What the weak regulatory system has led to, in regulatory terms, is privatization of media regulation. What do we mean? Simply because the system has not provided adequate remedies. Everybody to deal with their concerns about media infractions. So you start first from the military. Immediately after the Constitution, we saw a number of situations where soldiers disagreed with some specific publication. They went directly for the journalist. We remember the case of Cabral Biame here. We remember the case of Kaloan, Odate Wellington. The threat itself picked up people. The next we saw was that the judiciary, anytime they felt uncomfortable by any kind of publication, they used the contempt powers of the court, okay, for any moment where they felt either the judge or the court was scandalized, to address media-related infractions. Instances of media infractions. We saw Parliament Hall, our brother Egbert Fable. We saw the circumstance with Professor Dodu and others. So it's a long trend coming. When did the executive or people close to the executive come into this? You would recall that, and I wish I wouldn't have to talk about it, but I have to use them. Why all of a sudden now? It started with the Supreme Court. In the matter of GIBA and NMC, is where the court, in its obiter statement, drew for the first time publicly, drew public attention to the existence of those laws and their appropriateness in dealing with these matters as they are. So if you go to the judgment, you will find on page 35 that I'm cutting off a lot of the sentences, but here there are lordships. So
this judgment was delivered in?
This is 30th November 2016.
Thank you.
So when you see this administration after the court pointed to these, but even then also take note that the possible alternative in electoral terms is President Mahama still contesting. President Mahama is the one who has reported Abronye DC to the police under the same law. So it's going to be with us if we all don't have the humility to pause and say, where are we? But I said I wanted to, this is what the court said. Thus, in the legislative antecedents of this country, all matters which have the effect of restricting free expression have been made laws by acts of parliament. Examples are the cinematographic film censorship and create offenses with criminal sanctions for infractions thereof. Public Order Act 1994, Act 491. The Criminal Offences Act 1960, Act 29, which criminalizes minor offenses like use of insulting words, Section 207. Publication of false news, Section 2, in terms of Article 164 of the Constitution in protection of the rights and reputations of other persons. So the court hints for the first time at the appropriateness of the use of these legislations. You understand? So when you have clear judicial direction like this, we do not need to hassle ourselves too much to understand there were 7 major problems we were going to be confronted with. This is the second. The first came to pass without notice. It was the fight between Giba and the Ministry of Communications over the allegation that the ministry was going to give Star Times a license to operate communication services in Ghana. Chinese were forcing governments across Africa to cede off considerable part of their spectrum. And they were entering the markets, killing off local media, doing a lot of propaganda, and then stifling attacks on the Chinese, particularly in the extractive industries. So if you saw our anti-Galamsey fight, we used the media to fight considerably.
Right.
The then Chinese ambassador who was here in Ghana, it is a strategy that they have had in Central Europe, a lot of places where they sought considerable influence in the media. So one of the things we did was to say, and this is long before President Akufo-Addo, as you recall from LI 2224.
Yes.
So we need a system that authorizes the delivery of communications. Without the authorization for content services, they could not operate. And we needed this within the ambit of the National Media Commission, where Giba is a member, so that at least all of us can discuss the implications of these actions. You understand? That was one quick element. Give me a minute to explain the other element. Within the evolution of communications tempo, substantial part of their money revenues for the last couple of years has come from content on demand. In Ghana here, MTN had experimented with MTN Radio, which was on short code 1303. The same MTN at the time was running a pornographic service on short code 1516. When we put those laws before Parliament, we showed them how the service, that you brought all of them under some regulation, so that as they were entering the market, at least Giba, as NMC member, could have the opportunity to demand regulatory impact analysis before these services could run. If you follow the last census, a lot of the communication on the census was done within the networks of key reasons why we needed this kind of situation. This is water under the bridge.
Okay.
Where are we now? It appears to me that we can't shout the challenges out of existence. Now the court has pointed towards the use of this law. The police has found it useful. I expect with the people of Ghana that, as you rightly pointed out, it's the same law the IG used over false prophecy and all those things. Outside the false prophecy, every society, without the misapplication, every democratic society, I should say, requires this kind of legislation. This is what Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes of the US said, address situations of shouting fire in a crowded theater. There are circumstances where people can cause problems. Our difficulty now is that they are being applied in a circumstance that makes us uncomfortable. All that I want to put on the table for now is that it is not by accident. There's been a certain evolution. And so if we want to address the problem, we need to address it within its context. The attempt to overly analyze it solely within the context of politics or partisan politics is not going to help us address the things.
Okay. Because
we will leave the Akufo-Addo administration only to come to another administration which may find comfort in the application of the law.
So you have already started dealing with Section 207 and 208 of the Criminal Offences Act, which is being used by the police. And as you said, we are uncomfortable with how it is being used. Now, Professor Kweku Asare, Stephen Kweku Asare, who was to join us on this show this morning, but presently is unable to do, says that I always argue that our problem is not with our laws. Our problem is with our misapplication and misinterpretation of our laws. I'm reading this to situate a question I want you to answer. All of you, starting with Pemka. Now, he says, consider Section 208 of the Criminal Code, which is a public order law that criminalizes false speech that causes fear and panic or disturbs the public peace. This is a good law that exists on the books of most common law countries, if not all. People should not be allowed to disrupt public order by publishing false information. This law imposes criminal cost on those who falsely scream fire in a crowded theater. Recently, a man in the US was jailed under their Section 208 for falsely claiming on Facebook that he had paid his homeboy who had COVID-19 to spread the ailment by licking all items in a grocery shop. No reasonable person can doubt that such information can cause fear and panic, and indeed, it did. But Ghana police, prosecutors, and judges have their own purposive application and interpretation of Section 208. To them, if a journalist falsely claims that a politician has corruptly acquired state lands, then he is throwing the public into fear and panic. How many reasonable people will fear or be in panic on hearing that a politician has corruptly acquired state lands? Something that we have heard almost every week since March 6, 1957. The argument that such false information could lead to acts of revenge and disturb the public order is one that common law politics have considered and rejected by decoupling libel and public order. The accepted and prevailing doctrine assumed that there are abundant civil processes for dealing with such false information that potentially injures the reputation of others. The problem is that the police are merely criminalizing libel, which we decriminalized in 2001. The Attorney General allows them to, and the judges have not found any anti-speech prosecution that they did not like. To them, an injury to the reputation of, quote, a big man is not just a private injury, but also an offense against the people, public good, and the state itself, for which state resources must be deployed to seek criminal punishment for the cantankerous journalist. IGP Dampare should stop the abuse and misuse of Section 208 and 207. Wenka, where do you stand? Do we have to remove this law also? Judge Sapong had just said it is necessary, but qualifies that with the specific instances where that law will be needed.
Yes, good morning once again. And I associate myself largely with most of the submissions that have been succinctly made by my brother George Sapong, and seek to add a few things. You see, Samson, we need to look at our history as a people. What do I mean by looking at our history as a people? When the government of His Excellency President Kufuor came into office and decided to repeal the criminal libel law, it was informed by the circumstances of our past. And you know that by our history, they are shaped by our history because we live through processes that we regret. And so we find that either we should make new laws to fill in certain voids, or we should repeal certain laws in order to deepen our democratic dispensation. Need not say that our Constitution on circumstances such as what we are discussing. Now, when you look at our fundamental human rights and freedoms section in chapter 5, particularly Article 12, 1 and 2, it spells out clearly the fact that we ought to be abiding by these fundamental human rights and freedoms, which will serve as a guide to the three arms of government. And the exercise of these rights are subject to some caveats, that is, respect for the rights and freedoms of others and public interest. That is in 12, 1 and 2. So it is a constitutional mandate that we balance freedom of speech against individual rights and freedoms and the public interest. On the basis of this, that you find in the Criminal Offences Act, particularly as you rightly pointed out, Section 207 and 208, the attempt to criminalize portions of free speech. Now, what is the purpose of these two sections? Yes, we have a case where you can go to court for defamation to seek a civil remedy where you are hurt, or you go to court for a declaration that the conduct of a certain journalist or the other has brought your reputation into a state of disrepute and ridicule in the public eye. That is, there's something basically missing in the discourse. The 99% of those who have been accused or charged or put before court for contempt, most of their utterances basically are actuated by politics. Look carefully at all the accusations, the charges, and then the persons who have been put before court for contempt. Most of their actions are political. And my brother George Sapo, I just want us to have a reflection. Some of the afternoon shows in this country, radio particularly, you listen to those shows and it is as if the country is at a point as if we are being brought to an end in the next 1 hour. Most unfortunately. So if we have to continue a similar remedy to protect my integrity and etc., and there is no law that a particular act of a journalist and etc., we are likely to have some problems. I think I would likely agree with my brother George Sapo, and I will also agree to some extent with Professor Wekwaza that the problem we have is the maybe misapplication of the law. That is Section 207 and 208 of the Criminal Offences Act. Misapplication of the law may be the problem, but the proper application is to serve to guide and protect the reputation of people even before they seek civil remedies. And remember that the criminal prosecution is not a bar to a person seeking a civil remedy in another court. But again, why are we here? If yesteryears we cried to the high heavens because of criminal libel and we got it repealed, and again, as you rightly in your intro pointed out, if we think that as a people we have reached a stage where we do not need Section 207 and 208 of the Criminal Offences Act, and that it further stifles free speech, and we want to have an unregulated environment in terms of crime to go to seek civil remedy. If we want it that way as a people, we can trigger the processes and do the repeal of those sections. But I can tell you that a repeal of those sections may lead us to one other thing, that maybe tomorrow we may need to regret that we've repealed those laws because, again, people will act in excess. So I will say that we need a fine balance to be able to regulate the media environment for us to grow our democracy. Because really, some of the things that are happening, Samston, with all intended purposes, should not be happening in our democracy if you have a very responsible media. Because there is no place on earth where freedom is absolute. No place. because immediately you get beyond a certain arena, you step on my foot. When you exercise your rights, then my rights will begin to emerge and accrue. And so I will have to exercise them in another forum. And if the law provides in a particular situation that it is a crime in our books, as it has happened in other cases where we do not actually implement or carry out these laws, even though they are in our books. We have all the beautiful laws. The implementation is always being the problem.
So yourself, what do you say in some 30 seconds that these group of speech criminalizing laws, should we remove them and say that if anybody misspeaks, so to speak, or a journalist, that's something that you are unhappy with, you should resort to the thoughts of defamation?
Something I will say that we should exercise caution and hasten slowly in repealing these laws because they were put there for a purpose. I think what we should rather be talking about is proper application of the law and not in all circumstances and cases where the police will trigger.
Give us an example of a typical proper application. Context.
Something, if you look at the circumstances of the immediate past, some of the cases, I agree, quite frankly, I agree that there should have been civil remedies. But there are some cases where people, for example, sit on radio and make certain outrageous comments that if care is not taken, the vulnerable or certain people who, quote unquote, are bigots in society may take the law into their own hands and will end up having a situation on our hands that will disturb public
do you
peace.
agree?
And I was giving you an example.
Do you agree that if someone says that the president or his family have used the presidential jets running around shopping, or somebody says that do you agree this will not be a proper situation to use either Section 207 or 208?
Samson, again, let me just clarify this. If you look at Section 208, there is a disjunct. You realize that it is talking about to cause fear and alarm to the public, or you understand, to disturb the public peace. So either your act or conduct the public peace. Now, if you make a statement or an allegation against the president that has the tendency of inciting people against the first family, and which people can't act in a manner against the first family so as to satisfy themselves, does that not amount to an act that will disturb the public peace? Or does not amount to an act that will cause fear and alarm to the public? Because I'm saying this because
the law is the appropriate application of the law not really about a situation where there will be immediate reaction that is unlawful? So that's why we have almost all, as lawyers, we refer to one example that is given. In a theater, then somebody shouts, fire, and we all start running, and all sorts of things happen.
Cause stampede and all that. Yes. I think, but you see, as I'm putting this point possibly across, the most fundamental thing we should note is that every offense that we have what we call the ingredients that make the offense. And if those ingredients are absent in the conduct of the person, even if you put the person before court and you read out the facts, and the facts are such that they do not substantially support the charge, something I know what you've done in the past for your clients, with certain basic ingredients that ought to be available for a charge under Section 208 or 207 to sustain.
The most important defining ingredient is that the statement. First, the statement is false, we know that. But the most important is that it is likely to cause fear and panic or disturb the public peace. So once we cannot, ground causing fear and alarm.
Get acquittal for the accused person. Once you are not able to establish these basic ingredients, as you have rightly pointed out, and as I stated earlier, those are the ingredients. But you see, Samson, again, I want to make this little point before I wind up. When matters come up for discussion such as this, as we are doing, and the discourse is engendered by all of us, what we need to take notice of is whether or not the conduct of a person complained about falls squarely within the ambit of the law.
The question.
How reprehensible.
Professor Odrigajapo asked the question. Whilst the information or the news may be false, how can you establish that this about the First Lady or whoever it is will cause panic and alarm or disturb the public peace? How? How do you justify that?
But Samson, that is why I have repeatedly said this. I don't want us to isolate one case because there are quite a number of cases that have been discussed. Remember that in the end, the court, if it so finds that the basic ingredients or the basic necessities that are needed for you to secure a conviction in a matter like this do not exist in a particular case, it will acquit. So we are only talking about the arrest.
Okay, thank you. Hold on.
We are not talking about the fact that
right. So thank you. Hold on there for me. And Prof, not to narrow this to these two particular laws, but they are the reasons we are.
No, I'm not a lawyer, and I know that laws are there and there are complex reasons why laws are there. And these laws don't only apply to journalists or to free speech. So I'm not going to make a determination on that. However, journalism, to point out the fact that the reason we are in this space is that there are no explicit laws governing and regulating the media, particularly the broadcast media, where all these cases come from. We've had a broadcast law, and I think you've been involved 20 years ago. And in fact, yesterday at a World Radio Day event, it was pointed out by Professor Amin Al-Hassan of GBC that the law as it stands now has almost discussion. Yeah. We are always overtaken by events. We had a changing media landscape. We needed immediately, before we licensed the 684 or so radio stations that have been granted, we got to that point, we should have had a law explicitly stating how the terrain should be regulated so that people go for relief. We don't have that. We just keep getting promised administration after administration. It doesn't happen. And then when they feel aggrieved, when they are in power, they run to law. In your earlier submission, that all three arms of government we have had cause when they thought that their reputations were at stake, including Parliament, even though the Speaker was speech rights. It's time to stop making false promises and having laws that regulate. Look, if you had a law that spelled out sanctions, some of those sanctions could include even shutting down radio stations. So you don't need to put them in. It's the ownership of radio stations.
It's the biggest.
It's the biggest problem. Most of our radio stations are owned by politicians. It's not by accident that when Bobier Ansah was picked up by the police, it was NDC supporters who went. Our political, our media space has been captured by politicians, particularly the broadcast space. That's why we have 600 impossible. But why? Because everybody who comes into power wants a radio station. Chairmen of political parties own radio stations, which is a shame, Samson, because when at the beginning of liberalization, to pave the way for liberalization, and one of the things that the Bruce Commission advised was that we shouldn't have political parties.
In the bill, politically exposed persons are the ones prohibited.
Yes, but also religious interests.
That is so.
What are some of the problems we have now? It's with political interest and religious interests. You see, from 1993 to date that has led us to this position. It's also a problem of the lack of self-regulation.
It's the content regulation than it is about licensing and operating operational regulation, because I thought the NCA already had that. It has the power to shut down a radio station, of course, by going through elaborate processes.
No, but you know there's a disconnect, because the NCA is not the content regulator.
That's right.
So anytime the NCA has actions seem to have been that they've shut down a radio station because this operation is the content regulator, but they don't have the powers to shut down radio stations because they don't control radio stations. And I'm saying that
they can't shut down for content breaches. And I think all the shutdowns, they point to regulatory infractions.
But that's part of the problem, isn't it? Because you can use, it's kind of like in, let's say, the US, they are looking. So really, and because the NCA is, shall I say, a political animal?
Right.
You know, it's under the ambit of the executive, whilst the National Media Commission shutting down radio stations, particularly if it appears as those that have been shut down for good reason, and I'm not saying the reasons are not good, those that have been shut down for good reason, in quote, happen to be from a particular political...
The problematic, quote unquote, sections 207, 208, and the Electronics Communications Act, section 75, which criminalize speech, so to speak.
207, 208. I've already given indications that all of us tend to agree that precisely because of the metaphor of shouting fire in a crowded theater, we need to be careful. If there's anything at all, Professor Kakari just recently made a point that maybe we could clarify so as to exclude between you...
So that what, you exclude the media?
To exclude it as a media regulatory tool, whilst we work directly to address the media regulation that you've both addressed.
Criminal laws must be completely neutral.
But because speech offenses are complicated political animals, if we could have dedicated laws that address them within the context.
A criminal law to affect speech in a certain degree, you cannot exclude someone.
The point I'm seeking
because
to make,
that will mean that it will not pass muster. And if it is taken to the Supreme Court, it will be struck down.
We've just noticed that the court has its own attitude, but you're making a philosophical point. I'm just expressing my preference that if we are going to pass content regulatory instruments, we should make them comprehensive to address the concerns we have so that nobody needs to struggle to even look for this. And there is something you and Honorable Kwenkad did that, if you give me just 2 minutes, I would want to stress.
Please go ahead.
You pointed to the non-sustainability of the application of this law. So if there is anybody in the polity who thinks that because these laws exist, we don't need to address the problem that both you and Audrey were explaining, let's just keep in mind that this law, the government of it, you've just explained the ingredients, it survives on falsity. What would the society do when we come to circumstances where the speech has every likelihood of causing fear and panic, but it is not false? You understand? Those ones can only be addressed within the context of a good broadcasting.
What it means is that that one is not caught by the law.
Exactly is the point.
And even the falsity, if you read both and you add the electronic communications, it's not just a question of falsity, but deliberateness.
Yes.
Deliberately knowing that the thing is false and you proceeding, or neglecting to do the basic thing a journalist ought to do, verify.
Now, I want to add to the class element in the two pieces of legislation that you've spoken about. In the Electronic Communications Act, both in the Electronic Communications Act and in the Criminal Offences Act, there's a certain reverse of principle. In media regulations, the best piece of regulation, and Audrey made that point, is the one that centralizes the operator, the owner, which forces the owner to implement the gatekeeping measures that sanitize the material. Any piece of legislation that aims directly at journalists creates a chilling effect. Okay. Now look at the Electronic Communications Act. This provision that we have 207, 208 in the Criminal Offences Act, its application targets the speech maker. If you go to the Electronic Communications Act, it is the same thing that happens.
That's right.
But it even does something worse. It raises a presumption of knowledge against the speaker and creates a safe harbor for the operator.
Yes, it exempts the operator.
Exactly.
Yeah. Let me read it. Section 76 of the Electronic Communications Act. We passed that only in 2008. That's how many years after we had removed criminal libel. It says, a person who by means of electronic communication service knowingly sends a communication which is false or misleading, and likely to prejudice the efficiency of life-saving service, or to endanger the safety of any person, ship, aircraft, vessel, or vehicle, commits an offense and is liable on summary conviction to a fine of not more than 3,000 penalty units or to a term of imprisonment of not more than 5 years. So even here, we have escalated the punishment, whereas in the Criminal Offences Act, it's a misdemeanor and attracts a maximum of only 3 years, a maximum of 3 years. It says a person is taken to know that a communication is false or misleading if that person did not take reasonable steps to find out whether the communication was false, misleading, reckless, or fraudulent. Then 3, that's where George talks about. Subsection 2 does not apply to the operator or provider of a network or service over which a communication is sent.
Yes. So, in essence, we have created a safe harbor for the operator who must be bearing the greater responsibility. But just a small comment between ourselves as practitioners and the owners. When the matter is against the owners, the journalists mobilize to the defense of their bosses. When the matter is about the journalists, they keep quiet. And it's just a point that going forward, I think we need to keep in mind. I wanted to make a small point that I know it can unruffle people, but the truth needs to be said. We've just pointed out the non-sustainability of the use of sections 207, 208 in addressing media infractions. The other that I want to draw attention to is particularly the limited nature of the court's application of contempt, also as protection against, contempt is a very general, but I'm talking about the specific application in media-related cases. And I use the very, it's emotional for me, but I'll still talk about something. Take the Munte 3. And I have said this consistently, that I joke with friends that when they say the Munte 3 crossed the line, I say no, they erased it. So you have a person of personal distinction and professional integrity, like Mrs. Wood, that these people did what they did to her. The court could protect her then as a sitting judge. But immediately she left as a judge. If the same people carried the same content on the same person, there will be no remedy.
There will be no criminal remedy.
You understand? And when we talk about these things, even though we all express preference for civil remedies, we also admit that it's not entirely the same because the time involved in pursuing a civil matter, the cost involved. And let us also face it, offensive content does not only injure your reputation, sometimes it does injure your feelings as well. You understand? So nobody is calling for criminal legislation to address these things. All we are saying is that if there is anybody within the society who feels that there is something that protects them and therefore uninterested in the bigger question that we are all addressing, they need to pause. That the situation that we are confronted...
In the nuancing for the amendments that you speak about, how do you do it in such a way that the state, our collective interest, is protected? Because the state does not have a right to sue in defamation. So if I defame the state entity or whatever, I have not defamed them. The law does not give them the power to take a suit like a private person can take a suit. So if somebody did something really dangerously against the state, what should they resort to if you remove these laws?
Again, I'm not too sure that this is what we need, but it will also depend on the nature of the danger. Okay, we've seen some instances that border on national security. If the danger we are talking about relates to national security, perhaps it needs to be addressed. And it brings us to, certainly raise a very important point. Article 164 subjects all the media freedoms to laws that are reasonably required in the interest of national security, public order, public morality, and for the protection of the rights and freedoms of others. If you look at that law very closely, what it says is it does not make national security itself a prohibition against free expression. It says laws that are reasonably, you understand. It appears to us that unless the national security itself is going to lead or the state is going to pass those laws, the broadcasting law or any piece of legislation addressing that will be the best place where we detail these issues out. You understand? So in this sense, Samson, the answer to what you are asking is that we need to take our time humbly, modestly, to admit that we have done a disservice to our own selves by not addressing the regulatory issues within the media sector, particularly regard to the broadcasting laws. And that if all of us committed ourselves to it, there are avenues for us to address any kind of fear that we have about the nation. Let the media also understand that when we speak of regulations, it can be as constraining as it is liberating. Because it sets the boundaries against what other people can't also do to you.
Yeah, but something, can I add something? I know that our focus is on free speech and the press. But you're also talking about laws that, like I said, are general laws that can apply to anybody. Do we have an instance in which, except for maybe Abronia recently, where false news has been brought against politicians? Because it seems to me that particularly in campaign seasons, there's a lot of false news that politicians put out there that are not criminalized, and they don't
cause fear or panic.
They're not seen as causing fear and panic. In fact, even right now, some politicians, some MPs, they make utterances that could fall into that category, and nobody picks them up.
Political license.
The politicians have a license
the Media Foundation
peddle falsehood.
West Africa's Media Monitoring Report for June 2020 to May 2021 showed pro-NDC Power FM and pro-MPP Oman FM compete in dominating 10 account broadcast stations found to have no respect at all for regulatory and ethical standards. The two stations completely dominated in violations of the ethical principles of decency, accuracy, prejudice, bias, balance, impartiality, and public sensibilities in the content of their broadcast. In the frequency of violations, the two recorded 714 and 644 breaches respectively, while the closest to them, Accra FM and Hot FM, recorded 105 and 93 violations respectively. How do we deal with the situation? Because it is there, is the reality. Do you say that all these ethical breaches must be left, so you offend somebody and then they go to court in a civil suit?
Currently, that's the only recourse that we have, unfortunately. That's why we're talking about the fact that, and I can't say it enough, like a broken record, we do need laws that specifically address how we must regulate the media, keeping in mind the importance of keeping the free speech principles that undergird all democracies, but at the same time protecting the state from fear and panic, protecting people's hard-earned reputations, as in the case of, let's say, the First Lady or the Second Lady, etc. But we need those laws, and we can't run away from it. Otherwise, we'll be having this conversation every year, maybe twice a year even.
Yes, George, it does appear that the sitting president, whilst in opposition, I don't know his views now, whilst in opposition, supported the removal of these laws. He delivered a speech on the 4th of August, 2011, and expressed the need for the removal of what he felt were the obnoxious laws. And he said, among other things, that despite the repeal of these laws, that's criminal and seditious libel, media freedom is threatened by some of the arcane laws still on our statute books. This has become particularly apparent since the government of the National Democratic Congress once more assumed office in January 2009 after winning the 2008 general elections. Bereft of the convenient tools of criminal and seditious libel laws, the ruling government has had to comb through the criminal code to seize upon the offense of offensive conduct conducive to breaches of the peace and the sister offense of publishing false news likely to cause fear and alarm to the public. What do you say?
Samson, I have indicated to you that I see a certain trend in the privatization, of public authority for self-defense. I've given you the instances across board. Recently, we've seen chiefs in certain parts ordering the closure of radio stations. We've seen district chief executives doing the same. I have just pointed out to you that the Abronye case was brought by His Excellency President John Mahama. So I do not...
That's an earlier one.
No.
The one for which he has just been arrested was not based on a report by the president, the former president.
Of course,
Right. So the former president and his lawyers originally lodged a complaint against him.
Yes.
And he's continued by himself, and the police now took him out.
Okay, so that's the point I'm making. The broadness of the propensity towards application makes me cautious in not selecting just one politician to say this is where the problem is, because we may focus on that angle until that is over, only to be confronted with the problem again. And so when Audrey says, if we don't address these matters, we may be having twice a year or 3 times a year this conversation. I know that it's extremely sexy to drop in names like Akufo-Addo said this, is not done that. John Mahama said this, is not done that. Atamils, you understand. My call is that let's go beyond them to see the general difficulties that this whole society gets into. The last comment I want to connect to that, Samson, is the depressing statistics that you gave us from Media Foundation for West Africa. And you know why it's going to grow? Because it pays to bear scars for political parties. Look at the Vomao case that is before we are discussing. And I'm not going into the case itself. I'm just enjoying the politics of it. So you have a person extremely intelligent, very articulate, clearly with a political ambition. He makes these points. He's picked up by the police. Whole national visibility on him. the greatest visibility that every politician needs is a good organizer, is a good mobilizer. Mark it somewhere. When all these things are over, Oliver is a candidate somewhere in an election or is a candidate for a major political office. Mark it on the wall. You understand? Mark it. All the elements are in there. So if we allow ourselves to be drawn into this kind of circus, then you will see that if I sat on a radio station and gave out the loudest and the filthiest insult, I can go back to my political party and say, I'm the one who is able to take on party A or party B, and therefore I deserve this reward. Okay. And there are so many instances like that.
We know, however, that in the case of Oliver, he's been speaking against both parties, somewhat.
No, but to add to what George is saying, is that we already have in our media space this permutation. So all political parties pay professional social commentators, and they evaluate these social commentators based on their utterances, not just to defend the party's position, but to give it to the opposition. Okay? And that's why I come back to, are these people even picked up for false news when half the time it's propaganda and falsehood that some of these people propagate?
But what do you say? And Kwanka, I'll come to you finally. You are staying with us for the second segment as well. Bento joined us. Hello, Kofi Bento.
Yes, hello, Samson.
Hi, thank you. So let me get this at you. Now, I have read something, for example, from the president. The thing is that some media watchers believe that the president has not shown the way when he was in opposition, what he would say about some of these things. He's hardly saying anything about them. I am in a position to know for a fact that there are situations where national security guys have gone to pick up, journalists, manhandle them, and it was because of some party person that has been hurt, and the president is not connected at all to the event, and yet he will take the blame for it. What can the president be doing to change the environment, so to speak?
Well, from this point of view of the president, he should be sending signals. And as a leader, he has sufficient power within our constitution to even more or less move towards the repeal of certain laws. And this president in particular has been very active in the past in those areas. I mean, the criminal libel and other things was quite heavily involved. So everybody that I know who supported his presidency expected that when he finally ascended the presidency, he will do even more in that area to open up the space for press freedom. That has not happened. And I think that can be understood because he's now in the firing line. He's the one who is, people are attacking, etc. But it's also disappointing because it kind of questions the principle and why he was doing that from the beginning. So in the first place, I think that the president has made the right utterances in the past concerning media freedom, freedom of speech, and freedoms generally. He's taken the right actions in the past. We don't see him take the same actions now. It's sad if we have to say that because he's in the firing line, he's not taking those actions. But there's a broader situation. The broader situation is that space has changed. In the last 20 years, a lot has happened in that space. 20 years ago, you need an OB van and an outside broadcast van with at least 10 people. That stuff will cost you about $1 million before you can broadcast wide to the nation or so. Today, any young woman can sit in her room and switch on her cell phone and broadcast to the world. So a lot has changed. And you have a situation too where there's a democratization of knowledge and ability. So everyone is a journalist. And once you get on, we've had in the Communal Dumont situation where there was a debate about the definition of who a journalist is. Is it somebody who has gone to school or not? Asefa Mensah Thompson was arrested, he was called a journalist, and I agree. if you broadcast, so all of us who are involved in that stuff can necessarily be called journalists.
Really?
So there's a democratization there. It comes with a certain baggage.
Well, a citizen
Now,
journalist, I guess.
Okay.
Yes, so it comes with a certain baggage. Where everybody everywhere is doing everything, you should expect that there will be a certain magnitude, therefore, also of abuse and all the things that we are seeing. What we haven't done is to build a system to deal with this new reality. And please, let's all be clear, it will not change. It will not go back. It is happening in every sphere. The greatest rocket scientist today did not study rocket science. He read it, talked to people, and he's making rockets.
Kofi, just this small one. Just this one. Because you say this is really not about journalists getting into these infractions. It's clearly a general issue in our country, is it not? So how do you address that issue about people generally going on social media and instead of stating facts and disagreeing however violently, they are abusive, insulting, and I don't know. That's a terrible subculture, is it not?
It is, but Samson, I was developing the point that we have a situation where nobody created this. And the next point I was going to make is that no matter what anybody says, it is a good thing. 4,000 years of human experience has shown that free speech is better than a culture of silence. In this country, we've couched it in a very nice term. We are saying that we prefer ugly noises to a culture of silence. So what we need to do is not to seek to roll it back. Indeed, you can't roll it back. What we need to do is to build a system that takes care of that. And the next point is, should that system therefore be criminal or not? It is clear. All the jurisprudential thinking around this thing shows that you should not criminalize it. So indeed, our laws on false news, etc., if we have time, we'll go into why it is wrong and should be repealed. So what do we do in that sense? In short, this is what I'll say, and with time we can explain it. There must be a system that does very quick work in giving redress to people who are offended. And that redress must not be criminal. And I don't see why we cannot use the Media Commission for that. You have the National Labor Commission that deals with labor issues. As a labor lawyer, I go there sometimes, and I sometimes go to court. Every time I go to the Labor Commission, I get faster, adjudication of the matters. If the person is not happy, they can go to court, but at least you have an adjudication. I don't see why we cannot give the Media Commission teeth to drop down very hard on fining people, on taking licenses or suspending licenses, on basically doing the things that I know George and Audrey don't want because they think there will be an abuse. Well, that risk of abuse is less than leaving this thing and more or less allowing the politicians to use the laws and the courts, etc. Let's know this. And I was developing the point.
You are suggesting content regulation?
No, I will never allow content. I agree with content regulation. It is an infringement of rights. But I will say,
if we are learning from the best, what is our aversion to content regulation?
You see, content regulation is essentially censoring the mind.
No.
Okay? People were put in jail because they said the world was round and revolves around the sun. That's content. Okay? When you have far-thinking people, they will say things today that offend systems, offend religions, offend people in power. But they are not necessarily wrong. So as for content regulation, no. But there must be a system that deals quickly when people
Audrey would like to react to your view of content regulation.
Yes. I don't know of any country in the world, including so-called mature democracies, where there is not some level of content regulation, because speech is not absolute. Speech is not absolute.
Well,
so let me land. And therefore, what we should be talking about, I agree, put systems in place, have laws that spell out clearly what is accepted speech and unaccepted speech. So for example, in mature democracies and all over the world, there are hate speech laws. You cannot talk and make pronouncements that would lead to incitement of violence against other people, not just politicians. This discussion has been couched in a political space, but anybody else, based on ethnicity, based on disability, based on sexual orientation, etc., etc. You cannot do that, okay? So there's no absolute law. The content regulator must make that determination based on some clear parameters that does not that diminishes abuse and bias.
Okay, and you attempted that,
wait,
you attempted that, and the Supreme Court struck it down. You were supposed to go back and refine and present what should help us.
I think the Kofi introduces something that defines the question you are asking. When Kofi started talking about empowering the Media Commission to address the things, that's the point Audrey is making. But Kofi says he's against content regulation. So there's a certain conceptual lack of clarity about when we talk of content regulation, what is it? It's exactly the same thing that Kofi is talking about, that you need to empower the Media Commission. When you empower the Media Commission, all that is going to do is to set the limits and also clarify concepts to say, these ones, they may be robust, but if somebody does them, they don't offend the law, they advance public discourse. But these ones are harmful and you don't do them. You don't carry pornography, you understand. So when you speak of content regulation, that is all that there is to it. In the case that was before the court, and this is not about it again, clearly, it appeared that, like Kofi has just demonstrated, the first thing that we learn from it is that perhaps there's a certain social relearning that we need to engineer about three things. Number one is the nature of the technology and how it works. Number two is the regulatory structure that operates that technology. And number three, our understanding of our own society and the relationship between media, culture, and society. So if we are unable to do these things, it appears to me that going forward is going to be very difficult because...
You say this thing will grow, it will continue.
It's going to get worse. But the Supreme Court has put us in an extremely difficult situation. Unless we get to the point where on some of the issues, and I really don't know how, we are going to do this because the court has made pronouncement on certain issues that are global standards. The broadcasting bill that we are working on, substantial part of the provisions in that bill were those that were in this content instrument. Regulation. And the whole philosophy was that, as you pointed out, broadcasting law has three elements: the technical rules, the structural rules, and the content rules. The technical rules and the structural rules are in the Electronic Communications Act. What was outstanding were the content rules. So we took the content provisions in the broadcasting bill and said, maybe let us fix this. So when the court strikes all that down, I'm very cautious in saying, without completely examining it within the context of broadcasting regulation, the harm it does us is that half the provisions in the bill as we have it is already struck down by the court. So these are some of the difficulties, but I think that as all of us regroup to look at it, perhaps we may find some way out of it.
There's been a call for even laws to regulate contempt, and we don't even have that yet. Do you find the court to be acting contradictory when it strikes down content regulation and then it will punish people for contempt?
Surely, surely. The contradictions are extremely deep. But again, it is something that I think that we must find a way to discuss politely, humbly, for all of us to see that there is a certain judicial ambivalence in addressing these issues.
All right. Let me take Kofi. Kofi, conclude your comments.
A tiny thing to assure Kofi, because I discern also a certain sense or maybe apprehension in Kofi's statement that he may be worried about censorship. And so it's important to reassure him that we're not talking about prior censorship. We're not talking about a situation where you decide before the person publishes that the person cannot publish. Okay. We're talking about dealing after publication and making a determination whether that is okay and in the public interest, even if it sounds offensive, or whether indeed it's offensive and harmful and harms the public interest.
All right, Kofi.
So, Samson, indeed, Prof, you have hit the nail on the head. I think this must be clarified. I was using regulation in the place of censorship. So, for instance, when you use pornography, it is regulated here and everywhere. Yeah. But you can't tell the person, don't do this. Classify it properly. So, the government of my submission is that we need to build better systems to deal with the democratization of broadcasting. And I think it should not be left to law and the courts and the political powers that be. It should be left with organizations like the National Media Commission, and we should give them sufficient teeth so that we don't have to resort to the politicians. To a man with a hammer, everything looks like a nail, which is why you see a champion of freedom of speech like President Akufo-Addo, who at this time seems to be bringing back the criminal libel law that he repealed. And I think we should be moving to repeal some of those residual laws. But what do we do if we don't want the politicians and the courts to abuse, people's rights to free speech? And by the way, free speech builds nations. And free speech is not about protecting, nice things and good things and things that people agree with. Specifically, free speech is for protecting people who say things you don't like and may offend you. Offending you or annoying you is not a criminal issue. It is a civil issue. You should deal with it. And we should make a direct distinction between things that annoy people and things that are
But Kofi, you live in a country where insulting the president used to be a crime. It is no longer a crime, but insulting a chief is a crime.
Which is what we need to deal with. Because look, there was a time when just a few Ghanaians who even speak English well and would like to be on radio. Today, we communicate in so many ways. People are educated, they have, Facebook and all those things. We should be rolling back the limits of freedom and making sure that people can. I don't see why, if you offend a chief, it is a criminal matter. But the question is, are we going to leave it as a free fall? What I'm saying is, let's not leave it just to the politicians. All right. They will necessarily abuse it one way or the other.
Kwenka, you have the last word on this. The thinking is that, for example, reading from Suleiman Abrahima, who writes about his disappointment with President Akufo-Addo, is that what he's supposed to be doing is what he was doing when he was in opposition, about being active, about removing these laws. Now he's not.
Let me just say that I have listened carefully to my brother Kofi Bento, and along the line, I thought that there was some level of misunderstanding between something he had actually conveyed and what Prof wanted to say about the censorship bit of it, where it has been clarified that when the thing is published, then National Media Commission could come to do an assessment to find out whether or not in the circumstances they should have done A or B rather than that. But I think that largely what Prof has stated will be of so much help to us. But you see, what Suleiman Abrahima has said, with all due respect, you see, we are living also in a state where institutions have been mandated by law to perform certain functions. If you look at these arrests that have been made particularly, you realize that they were carried out by the police. And nobody has any evidence that the police were so directed by the president to act. Nobody has been able to prove that to me at all. Unless we want to say that the president should be directing the police in a certain manner, to act in a certain manner, then that would be a different thing altogether. And I don't think that that will enhance and deepen our democracy at all. What I rather would prefer is that we should engender a debate as to whether or not to sustain and maintain Section 207 and 208. When we are able to, in the court of national discourse, arrive at any conclusions and then we present them to Parliament, whether or not we want the repeal of the law as a people and it is repealed, then we move on. If we do not want the repeal, but we want to sparingly use it, or use it in only exceptional circumstances or cases that are clear and fall within the ambit of what has been anticipated in 107 and 207, 208, we should so do in explicit terms. But for me, as an individual, my position is that those laws should be allowed in our books, but we should use them sparingly in extreme cases where there is the need to carry them out, and rather allow people to vindicate their rights.
And what is the role of the president in this? I think that's the question people are asking, because the president has a critical role to play. You say if the police is using it, the president cannot be instructing the police. But what has been his communication? The modern Ghana journalists' arrest and allegations of torture. What did the president say? Caleb Kuda was also picked up. National security. All of these things are not matters that the president doesn't have power over. What has he said? And I've mentioned to you before that I know, and I know better in a situation where I cannot blame the president for the act, but I expect him to say something.
Something. That is why I continue to say that, see, it appears to me that we are all just giving credence to what is in our constitution, the overbearing powers that have been vested in the president to exercise and do everything and anything except changing the man to a woman. It seems we are giving credence to it. And I don't think that we should. We should actually allow institutions to function independently and carry out their mandates so that their acts can be subject to judicial interpretation and struck down where they are found to be in contravention with any existing law. But if we want to say that the president on every occasion to make pronouncement on any and everything that happens in the nation, then we are giving credence to the overbearing power that we have given to the president in the constitution, which I think is not necessary. I am saying that we should allow the systems to work. But as a people, we should engender debate.
The president is the head of national security. The president is in charge of national security and the Ghana Armed Forces. The president has come into office as a champion of rights, including free speech and media rights. You are saying that the president should not be saying anything to his appointees, that he has the power to, remove anytime?
Specifically with reference to his appointees, you see, you have to distinguish them. The political appointees, strictly speaking, and then the professional appointees.
The political appointees, that was my reference, the political appointees.
For his political appointees with respect to acts of, for example, the Attorney General and Minister for Justice and other such like ministers that carry out justice functions and etc., the president can direct them to act in a certain manner. But I am saying that it is improper for us to expect the president to direct the IGP to act in a certain manner. He can, however, as head of national security, have dialogue with security agencies to have a second look at the way they function in a certain manner. But that will not also be in the public domain if he has done that. It will not be in the public domain. If the president confers with the IGP as to what to do with respect to certain regulations or laws that have been breached or been implemented, that may not be in the public domain, and it may not come to my attention or your attention, but it doesn't mean that it's not being done. However, in the circumstances of this matter, as I have indicated, and I want to say again, Parliament, the representatives of the people, can trigger processes if we so think that these laws should be repealed, so that we do it and move on as we did in the criminal libel law. But for me, my position is that we should maintain these laws, but use them sparingly.
If you've forgotten, I read a while ago what the president said in August of 2011, and he says that the government of the National Democratic Congress once more assumed office in January 2009 after winning the 2008 general elections, bereft of convenient tools of criminal and seditious libel laws. The ruling government has had to comb through the criminal code to seize upon the offense of offensive conduct conducive to the breaches of the peace and the sister offense of publishing false news likely to cause fear and alarm to the public. He said, desperate to keep in check a robust media, the police first seized on this office, one office to invade a radio station, among others. practically blaming the government then. You think it is wrong to blame the government now?
You see, I am not saying it is wrong to blame government, but I'm saying we should situate it within the context of where we are. Then we will get a better appreciation of what we are doing. Otherwise, I'm saying that if we don't take care, you would put each and everything that happens in this country at the doorsteps of the president. Even when he's asleep, you will say that what was happening behind as another person's house, he ought to have known it, etc. I'm saying we ought to be very careful the way we engender national discourse on matters like that. He has stated that position time and again. What is important is that let's allow the state institutions to function. I know that His Excellency the President will make statements respecting this at the appropriate time, and then we will all have issues put to rest so that we can move on as a people. All
right. Thank you so very much. Joseph Premka Dumdiok is former Deputy Attorney General and Minister for Justice. As I understand, he will stay with us as we deal with the questions that we have to ask about the judiciary. We can't thank you enough, Professor Audrey Gadjikpo, Professor at the Department of Communication Studies, University of Ghana, and George Sapong, Executive Secretary, National Media Commission. Kofi Bento, I don't know, are you staying with us? We'll be right back. You're welcome back. This is Newsfile. It's the most authoritative news analysis platform. And here on Newsfile, we put Ghana first. It's brought to you by Bank of Africa, strong as a group and close as a partner, MTN everywhere you go. Ashasi University, educating ethical and entrepreneurial leaders for Africa. Robert & Sons Optical Services, your comprehensive eye care services provider since for 31 years. Waylead Properties, home is where one starts. CBG, we stand with you. Edlom Housing, where spacious homes cost less. Duraplus, where Duraplus goes, water flows. And Rehoboth Properties, quality housing for all. So just share just a couple of your messages. This one from Abdul Malik Kukubako with rare artillery support says that Parliament can and must do something about sections 207 and 208 and even the laws on contempt, same way criminal libel and seditious laws were dealt with. You remember the Supreme Court held that the criminal libel and seditious laws were constitutional in the Tommy Thompson, Ben Korku, Kofi Kumsin case. The way forward lies in some legislative engineering. The ball is in the court of the legislature. So thank you, Abdul Malik Kubako, Editor-in-Chief of the New Crusading Guide newspaper. Dr. Angela Jonobuaji says that content regulation is important to protect vulnerable persons too, such as children. Cybersecurity Act is an example. And as Audrey referred to, she says hate speech, so-called, must be clearly defined. Clarifying what constitutes hate speech is also a form of content regulation. We don't have in this country, and we must work at it. Okay, so bugbing is the phenomenon. Is the phenomenon we are seeing a simple case of misreporting by media? Which media does the speaker watch or listen to? And this is from Kweku. So which media does he listen to? Interesting. Another side to this discussion is the constriction of space for free expression. The repeal was precipitated by the experience of the media in the Rawlings era and was a direct campaign request. Question is, are we looking to err on the side of free expression or on the side of regulation and enforcement? The answer, it does appear, depends on whether the respondent is in government or in opposition, unfortunately. And that's Malco. Thank you for that as well. And Mauli Atachi says, in general, media in Ghana is fairly responsible, notwithstanding one or two bad nuts seem to have overshadowed the mainstream media, mostly because they seem to have a certain political backing plus certain high-level elite in society. Still, free speech must stand with fair balance. Pilolo 4 says, the media focuses more on Sole and do bad job. Sole is money that some media people take and do a bad job. Example, constantly asking government why they won't refine our crude oil for local use at a cheap rate. They rather call people to discuss world prices, speak big terms to portray knowledge. I didn't get that part. Boachi Emmanuel says there should definitely be a criminal element to regulation of free speech. Whoa. People have lost their lives unnecessarily because mischievous people have published false news about COVID-19 vaccine. Who is going to sue those propagandists for defamation? Opipihini says, I explicitly, without equivocation, think that it will be just barbaric in this day and age, dispensation of free speech. One would be gagged from airing his views, especially when he does so within the ambit of the law. I think that's a good qualifier you have put there. And that would be outright witch hunting. K. Amwa says, according to Section 208 of the Criminal Offences Act, publication of false news. Who determines what is likely to cause fear and alarm to the public or disturb the public peace? Well, that's the court. That's why they take it to court. Then Embo says, certain individuals and institutions, if you defame them, you risk inciting or provoking mob action against them on their behalf. The police service has a role to ensure that people justify their accusations against such people or go before a judge expeditiously. Last one from Parkwesi. The irresponsibility in the media space is too much. The people in there are competent, no doubt, but political capture is what is running media in Ghana now. That's, you say, is your opinion. Thank you very much for sharing that with us. Now, let me introduce my next set of guests. Of course, we are joined by Kweku Yamwa Pencil. He's a lawyer, senior member at the bar. Thank you for joining us. And as we commence the discussion, we may also be speaking to Xavier Koku Kuji, who is the Public Relations Officer of the Ghana Bar Association. I must say that it's been a rather difficult production for this particular topic because there are people who prefer to express their views privately rather than be in the media space speaking about the question of judges. I'm talking about lawyers practically just running away from being public about it. This very last message I should read from the Jacob Osei-Yeboah, independent presidential candidate, says something. The media too uses its power against anyone who speaks ill against and about their bad attitude within the media. You yourself can witness how your own came against you when you became emphatic about nuances in the media. So each organ uses the power within its space to deal with unpleasant news instead of respecting the law per the tenets of democracy. The media can black you out, use their platform to also attack you. We Ghanaians or Africans are unconsciously lawless people and power drunk or dictatorial in our various levels. All right, thanks for that. Now, let's get to the judiciary. And let me begin with Kwenka. As a former Deputy Attorney General and still in the business of the practice of the law, what do you say about Sosu's comments, Francis Xavier Sosu's comments, which is getting him into trouble. Well, he doesn't feel like he's in any trouble. He's justified everything he says. But let's quickly listen to this quickly. Let's watch this.
I am begging you, if you make yourself a political judge, you will be treated as a political judge. What it means is that when you become a partisan, when you become very partisan as a judge, remember that your tenure of office as a judge will run with the political party that you favor. Let that be very, very clear, because political power is very transient. Positions are not possessions. So people will come, people will go. Remember, His Excellency George Rawlings, when he was full of power, and they asked him, will you be ready to hand over power? He said, to hand over power to whom? Because when you are full of power, you forget that there are even alternatives. I remember when Kufuor came to power, they said by the time they finish with NDC, after 8 years, there will be no political power known as NDC. It shocked him when Mills became president of the Republic of Ghana. So the current regime must be mindful of our political history and know that the power they hold today, tomorrow they may not have that power.
Right. The Ghana Bar Association issued a statement condemning these comments outright, and then the Association of Judges and Magistrates also issued a statement and have proceeded to file a complaint at the General Legal Council to sort of get him punished. What's wrong with the comments he made?
Now, Samson, thank you very much once more for this opportunity. Let me say that in dealing with matters like this, my preliminary comment will be that you need to situate whatever somebody says within a certain context and content. I'm talking about context because if you don't situate it within that context, your comment about the person may be over the bar. Now, what was the occasion that the honorable member made this statement?
The Yentua demonstration.
That was the situation. And Yentua demonstration, we were told, was organized by members of his party and other people.
That's right.
To register their displeasure. So what provoked him into veering into judicial matters with respect to this? What was the link between Yentua demonstration and talking about judges or courts? There seemed to me not to be any connection at all whatsoever between what he was doing at the time and the comments he made subsequently. That's my problem.
Does that matter?
But that does not matter. I would soon establish why I'm making the statement. You see, Samson, one thing that as Ghanaians, when we immediately misuse it or take it to the cleaners, will dampen all our aspirations as a democratic nation, is the issue of attacking the judiciary. After all, at the end of everything, that is where you go to vindicate your rights. So if you are placed in a privileged position as a person, a lawyer especially, and you make comments that have the tendency of inciting the public against justices, or that has a tendency of undermining the administration of justice.
The judiciary is a third arm of government.
Absolutely.
Which arm of government is beyond criticism?
It is never, ever beyond criticism. But I'm saying situated within a context that everybody listening to you, or the majority of people listening to you, objectively will come to a certain level of conclusion. When you start talking about, this is our business as lawyers. What is our first cardinal principle? That anything we say ought to be supported by what? Evidence. That is the business of lawyers. You see, if you make an omnibus statement, then it may catch up with everybody else. Because what he has said virtually has roped in everybody until we get specifics from him, what he meant by that, and who are political judges. And saying that, and what is even surprising, Samson, is that I know Sosu, by our standard now, is a senior lawyer.
Yeah,
it's more than 10 years at the bar.
Yes, he is.
And so if he's making certain utterances, he ought to give pieces of evidence to substantiate what he says. Then, at a point, Judge A, Judge B, Judge C, or D, by their conduct, have put themselves in a certain state or light that when there is a change of government, their tenure of office will be... And that is even more problematic. That bit of his is more problematic because, you see, when there's a change of government, the new government cannot come and say that Justice A or Justice B leave because you are a political judge. It cannot happen.
He's clearly aware of that.
But then he makes this statement. That's a political statement he made. Because you see, there is a procedure for removal of justices. And if you trigger it, you must go through the constitutional procedures to come to that conclusion. And then if it is about a justice of the Superior Court of Judicature, the complaint, then
is a procedure that you use to remove Electoral Commission chairpersons, right? Commissioners.
Yes.
And some say that once the MPP was not happy with Charlotte Osei, they removed her. So if he says whatever, I'm just thinking.
Samson, if MPP, for me, I don't think the MPP was not happy with her and removed her. It was the processes constitutionally mandated that were followed through to get her removed from office. There was a complaint. There was a referral to the CJ, and the CJ made a prima facie determination. It went back there, and then a committee was constituted of eminent justices of the Supreme Court and others. And then they, after evidence, they arrived at a decision that indeed her conduct breached our constitution, and therefore she was removed from office. That was the process. So if they come into office and then they have any evidence against a person and a complaint is made and they go through this process, it is basically...
There are people who are complaining today that they have filed similar complaints. The president will simply not forward it for the processes to kick in.
An example. Because you remember recently, I think it was a SEPA or something that filed against, and the president forwarded it to the CJ to make a determination whether or not there's a prima facie case.
I'm on record as saying that was such a useless thing. The president didn't even need to waste his time on it.
Of course, I heard you, and I heard you bluntly. But the point is that if the president receives it, he has to forward it to the Chief Justice for determination, and then the Chief Justice then makes a determination, and it comes back to the president. And at that stage, if there's a prima facie case, that is when they will now constitute the committee to look at the matter and then arrive at whether or not there is even any evidence at all. And if there is, and the person has no answers to it.
Is this a statement that should get the GBA against their own and get the judges taken before the General Legal Counsel, potentially for him to lose his license to practice as a lawyer?
You see, I think first of all, it should not have come from him. That has been my position from day one. I thought that it should not have come from him. Any ordinary member of society, not being a member of our noble profession, could make such utterances and will forgive the person. But the problem I have is the author, being a member of parliament and a senior lawyer, and making such utterances, the implication to society and what it can do generally. You have no idea. Sometimes I say this, Samson, as you sit to regulate or as host of Newsfile, you don't have any idea how you are admired out there, Samson. And I recall when you came to Bolga, I saw young men who are close to me. Is that Samson? They were rushing to you to come and listen to you and all that. What does it tell you? It tells you that any conduct of yours can influence them. That's what it means. So this is an honorable member of parliament and a senior lawyer who is making such statements. Then how about the ordinary members of society who are his supporters and who believe in him?
The NDC is aggrieved that because you are trying to pass e-levy and you can't pass it somewhat, you are trying to reduce their numbers in parliament through means including criminally prosecuting one of their members. to remove him. And that's their problem. That's why he says...
Samson, is that the first time that a sitting member of parliament is being prosecuted criminally? During their regime, it happened. It was good.
Adamu Dramani Sakande, even he didn't survive
the implications of his imprisonment. At the end, he had to give up.
Okay, all right.
So for me, this is not the first time. I just want to touch a bit on that. I've heard people run commentary about MPP attempting to reduce NDC's numbers in Parliament. The question you should ask yourself is, there are 137 NDC MPs. Why are they not all being prosecuted but one person? If he has questions to answer, he should answer. We are all equal before the law. So the charges that have been preferred against him, if he's innocent, the court will make a pronouncement. If he's guilty, the court will make a pronouncement. But you don't say that because the person is a member of the opposition, if you try him, therefore they will say it is political witch hunt. If an offense is committed, you should stand aloof. Then we will be making mockery of the constitutional injunction that says that we are equal before the law.
Okay. Yes, Pencil.
Yeah.
What do you say? There are some lawyers, including Soso himself, who are unhappy with the GBA for issuing a statement sort of disowning their own. They're saying, what's your business in going to the defense of judges when one of your members has made a comment?
I think that's a very interesting. I belong to a lawyers platform where these issues have been raised and discussed extensively, and anybody who's on the platform clearly knows my view on the subject. In the very first place, the GBA as a body, it's a voluntary body. You belong to it voluntarily. The GBA does not speak for one of its members. And the GBA is not going to keep quiet or shut its mouth merely because a member has done something which, in the opinion of the leadership, I'm using the word leadership because at any point in time, we've got an executive who must act on behalf of the association. And therefore, it's my view that when the GBA takes a position on the matter, it's irrespective of whether any particular member of the GBA stands A or stands B. What the GBA seeks to do is to articulate the kind of position that, at the very best, reflects what the association itself stands for. In that regard, the statement that Sosu made, it is for the GBA as a body to determine whether it was in the right spirit. And if it was not, it did not really matter to me that GBA condemned it. And indeed, and in fact, I support the condemnation. That the statement he made was outright irresponsible. And that is my view of the matter. It happens to coincide with the view of the leadership. It may also be on the other side. What it means is that the GBA is a collective of all manner of people who are in there with different persuasions, political, call it whatever. But as an association, we reflect certain principles. And irrespective of what a particular member's view on a matter is, the GBA will not be held back. So I support it. That's point number one. Indeed, and in fact, before the matter even went to the Ethics Committee, I'm talking about the
General Legal Council.
I had expressed an opinion that I wish this matter will find its way there. When I say so, it doesn't mean that will end in a particular conclusion. But what I mean to say is that such kind of statements made by a lawyer of standing cannot just be left to go the way it has. Because, as my colleague has already stated, it's a cardinal principle of our training that a lawyer must not put into writing or by voicing anything that he does not have the evidence to support it, especially when the allegation is one that is impugning impropriety to somebody. First and foremost, there is no such thing as a political judge.
Has he made an allegation?
Come again?
Has he made an allegation?
Well, the point that he made, that's the way I would put it. Because there's no factual basis, or if there's a factual basis, I haven't seen it yet. So, to the extent that you make a remark that there are political judges, when in law, there's nothing like a political judge. In other words, judges are appointed by politicians. But the Constitution provides safeguards. They are under no control. Once they go through the processes of being sworn into office, they become independent. And therefore, we don't look at our judges and begin to look at who became a judge when who was in power. That's not how we categorize our judges.
What's wrong with that?
There's nothing wrong with it. When you mean categorizing judges, then you are giving the impression, if you call a judge a political judge, the point that you are making, I'm talking about, it's a form of innuendo, it's a form of suggestion. You are trying to suggest that that judge takes decisions based on his political persuasions. In other words, he would only align himself with the view of the particular political party who brought him into office, which indeed does not reflect the reality on the ground. There are perceptions.
Can't judges take decisions based on their political affiliations?
That is not
Don't judges have political affiliations?
Judges do.
Yes.
But you are not supposed to bring it out in the open. A judge can never sit on the bench and state that he belongs to a party. Other than that, then they have to recuse themselves in as many cases that come before the court, which are brought by politicians.
You're familiar with American realism?
Yeah, the American realist school of thought.
And therefore, if you went to the American Supreme Court,
that is all.
You might need an advice consultation to tell you if it's a political issue you're addressing in the court,
yes,
which judge you should address and not waste your time on which judge or that judge. It is because their political affiliation and orientation influence their decisions. So what's wrong with it?
The American Supreme Court is classified into liberals and conservatives, and they are known.
Exactly.
And there was all this politics about who to appoint and whatever, and therefore every politician or American president tries to appoint somebody of his persuasion. We know that Trump tried to fill as many of the vacant positions with conservatives, but the conservatives have not been doing Trump's bidding. It is quite clear from the decisions that they give. They turn him down as many times over the entire period of the election dispute and stuff like that. And that shows what, in essence, a judge's work is supposed to be. That irrespective of the views that you have, when the issues come before you, it is the evidence and the law. It does not even matter how you agree. Indeed, and in fact, if the people that Trump appointed to the Supreme Court agree with him on everything, he will still be president by now. So that shows you the interplay of, I'm talking about what in strict terms we call separation of powers.
Right.
So it is very insulting.
So I guess my question is, why should the judge be worried, especially if that judge doesn't find themselves to be a political judge, quote unquote, like you're saying, who is a political judge? Why should a judge be worried? And I'm just looking at this University of Baltimore Law Forum. There's an article, How Judges Judge, Theories on Judicial Decision Making. And, a judge's idiosyncrasies, a judge's feelings, how they felt the morning before they sat in court, and all of that.
Even how his wife treated him in the morning.
Exactly.
In Ghana, there's a story about Judge whose vote was stolen.
This part says that the factors most likely to influence judicial decisions are: 1, direct influences, which include A, legal and political experiences, B, political affiliations and opinions, and C, intellectual and temperamental traits. And then 2, it says indirect and remote influences, which include a legal and general education, and B, family and personal associations, including wealth and social status.
Yes, you asked the direct question, I want to say it. Even if a judge, but please, let's put it this way. We know for a fact there are clerks of judges in the U.S. Supreme Court who have written books showing how judges come to conclusion in our courts. When you speak to some of the clerks, they tell you how judges sometimes discuss with them. But all of these things at the end of the day goes through the crucible, and what comes out is supposed to reflect the law, the evidence, the facts, and everything. So what you do when you call a judge a political judge is what we call prejudice. You expose him to the public. And what then you are trying to do is that, don't mind this man. Whatever he does got nothing to do with the law that he studied. It's got more to do with how his wife talked to him this morning, how his goat was stolen last year, and so forth. So you ridicule a judge. And please, of all people in this country, the only category of people who can least defend themselves are judges. By the very nature, you see, that's what makes it very sensitive when you are dealing with judges and you don't have the evidence, and you are trading rumors, perceptions, allegations, trying to translate them into factual statements. That is very criminal. I mean, that's the way I would go as far as to put it.
Does it not matter that what he said was conditional?
Well, if he says conditional, even then, like my good friend started with the context, this is a volatile political environment. And you spit this into that atmosphere. What must people make of it? Because on a day, you see, I go back to prejudice. Prejudice is exposing somebody to a form of ridicule, hatred, call it what you like, without giving that person the equal opportunity to have his side of the matter heard. And even in terms of the generality, the way you generalize everything, at the end of the day, somebody sitting in his small corner who possibly is not being caught in the crucible, caught in all this drama, then everybody, then what people say, didn't we say it? The people who said, didn't we say it, they themselves don't have the facts. Because don't forget about this Afrobarometer, all of these perception indexes that people run in this country, in which all kinds of allegations are made against people who have no opportunity to defend. They're already sitting on edge. So when you throw this one into it, you kind of inflame what is already a volatile situation. That's the way I see it. So it's not a very simple matter where people, judges in particular, can ignore it. As to whether at the end of the day he is guilty or liable for any particular, I'm not making a comment on that. But I would just make this general statement that it is not open to a lawyer for that matter. Of course, if it's the Macaulay woman who made this statement, it will not even be an issue. But when you take a lawyer, we call ourselves learned people. Learned people.
An honorable member of parliament.
And we have a code. At the end of the day.
So hold on, Kofi, it is a fact, is it not, that among judges, and right here in this country, there are people who have been party activists, there are people who have been party executives, political party executives, who have risen to become judges. So is it that far-fetched, unheard of, for anybody to raise the criticism that Sosu did?
Something, you are right. And my whole problem with this whole discourse is that we should be normalizing the fact that judges have political leaning. I don't know why we keep making that such a difficult issue. And we should be normalizing the thoughts that regardless of a judge's political leaning, his or her judgments are based on the law, facts, evidence. And we all know judges. I'm telling you, almost every judge that I know makes decisions based on the law, the evidence, and the facts, regardless of their politics. So this whole thing about a judge has a political leaning, it is politicians who appoint judges. And no sensible politician will appoint a judge who is not of his fraternity. But we know the judges, when they are appointed, that they sometimes rule against their friends. So we should be normalizing, not making it look like it is a crime for a judge to have a political leaning and even to express it at certain places, especially private situations. That situation is what you are referring to in the US. It is very normal, it is known, it is put out there, and people adjust to it. Now, the issue here, however, is about perception against fact. And again, I am reflecting it on those of us lawyers here. We are dealing with a situation where the perception of Sosu as a politician and as an activist politician is being taken beyond the point and not the fact of what he said. I think Sosu should have been more circumspect and maybe avoided this kind of controversy leading to all these kinds of discussions. But what did Sosu say? He said, if you make yourself a political judge, then you will be judged as such. There is no problem with that. And the irony is I spoke to one judge who said that they don't see where the problem is. And they, the judges, have a problem with their colleagues who are political judges because they taint all of them. Samson, if you speak to them, you will know what I'm talking about. So what Sosu said, and we are lawyers, we pass words, we take issues, we draw them out, we pull out meanings. Why are we not doing it to this? He says, if you make yourself a political lawyer, you will run with the political system. And let nobody kid yourself. Look, like you said, they remove the easy check. If people are in power, they have everything they need to remove any judge, whether they do it by fair or foul means, by the legal route or illegal route or some other route. Power is power. So let us be clear about these things, that look, we urge that all the persons, and this is Newsfile, we are speaking to the public, everybody needs to know that our judges, for the majority of them, the absolute majority of them, regardless of anything, really rule on the basis of law and not their political affiliations. But they do have political affiliations.
Yes.
We need to normalize that.
Sosu has, written back twice. After the GBA issued a statement, he issued a statement back calling their bluff and asking them to focus on their core mandate and stop doing what they are doing. The judges and magistrates also spoke to the press and then said they had filed a complaint. He returned and said, look, I'm speaking truth to power. If you are not comfortable with it, deal with it. But I have said nothing that is wrong, cannot be said. And he's actually said that he's ready to lose his license as a lawyer. He has come close to that. He suffered a 3-year ban, but he got a court. A court, vindicated him, and he got a shorter period.
Yeah. I mean, and look, Samson, I always say that of the whole spectrum of people who constitute the human race, it is activists who move us forward faster than anybody else. The people who go out there and push the boundaries.
You say as a lawyer, you would not have chosen his words. So why do you still find it okay?
I find it okay because even if I disagree with Sosu, I respect his right to be an activist and to speak what he believes in, especially if he chooses his words well, like he did in this instance. I may not do the same thing. I may not advise other people to do the same thing because your license is your livelihood. And there are people who are fond of filing frivolous and useless, complaints at the General Legal Council. And you never know how that is going to turn out. So you might want to consider that. But not all of us are necessarily in fear of that stuff. And to that extent, I think Sosu reserves a right to voice what he needs to voice. I mean, I am resisting speaking about the Ghana Bar Association because I have very little positive stuff to say about them. In the last decade or so, we think that the Ghana Bar Association could have done things differently and could have been more relevant to all of us. So the fact is that
the question of relevance of the Ghana Bar Association has come up on the back of this. I have tried to review some of the statements they have made or issued over the period. The problem particularly has been that they don't, come to the aid of the ordinary when they are suffering human rights abuses and the rest of them. I've reviewed in the last 3 years or so, and I've seen that they have issued tons of messages, as if sometimes we forget that they have been doing these things.
Samson, I will resist discussing the Ghana Bar Association. Let me put it this way. If the Ghana Bar Association was truly voluntary, I have no doubt that a whole load of lawyers would elect not to be members of the Ghana Bar Association. So I will resist discussing the Ghana Bar Association. I don't think.
Okay, hold it on there. Yes, Pencil.
First and foremost, the Ghana Bar Association is wholly voluntary.
Yeah, we know that it might.
No, it's wholly voluntary.
In law, that is what it is, but No,
but there's nobody. I mean, what Blue chose to set up.
Hello, Samson, do you hear me? Hello, Samson.
Yes, Kofi.
I think we'll be wasting time discussing whether the Ghana Bar Association is voluntary or not. I think you should use the time better. So let's move on to specific.
Thank you. Yes. Let's hear from Mr. Pencil.
But with respect to
yes, that's your right.
Nobody finished or was called to the bar and was instructed by the General Legal Council to go and register with the Ghana Bar Association. I think that must be put as a matter of fact. I mean, there are facts that we must put out as lawyers. That's point number one. Point number two, listen, as lawyers, we are regulated in the main by a code of etiquette, rules of conduct. Currently, it is LI 2423. In the LI 2423, that regulates the way a lawyer must conduct the business of a lawyer, including the fact that if a lawyer, you've got evidence of something that a judge does that puts him out to be unfit for the office, you don't sit down with it. It is an imposition by statute. albeit a legislative instrument.
I do this work.
Yes.
And by virtue of this show that I host,
Yes.
And several others, I have had situations where I've had to be plain to go to the defense of a judge or judges.
Yes.
There have been times when they have done things that deserve the praise. We have said it.
That is so.
Why is it that we cannot say things that they feel unpleasant about?
No, it's not even that. It's not the case. Judges can be open to criticism, heavy criticism, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Yes.
I mean, that point was made very clear.
Yes.
But there are contexts within which it must be done. In the case where you have a case, you see, the whole idea that don't put in the mind of the public that when a judge does something wrong, he can remain in office as long as the political party he belongs to is also in office. It is a very dangerous statement. And to suggest further that as a lawyer, you've got evidence to show that a certain judge is not fit to be in the office by reason of his political persuasion. The evidence must be that the judge has certain influences, certain...
He gave an advice without particularly saying that somebody is a political judge.
Yeah, but my good friend asked the question, somebody must answer it. What prompted that advice? You advise judges when you are doing demonstration?
When you are doing demonstration about the e-levy, and the e-levy for which the minority accuses the majority of seeking to reduce their numbers so that they can pass it, and by which they say that the prosecution of one of their members is political.
Then you put it in context.
Will he be pronounced
you know,
guilty?
then when you do it, then you are accusing the judge with the conduct of that matter as likely to be influenced by his political persuasions. And that is not fair. Indeed, you have put it on the spot. If this is put within the context, even before the judge has had opportunity to look at the evidence, you are prejudging the matter.
You say it is okay that this should go to the General Legal Counsel
no,
for discipline.
Counsel, no, it's a General Legal Counsel. The whole idea of General Legal Counsel is a complaint that somebody makes against you on the basis that you've engaged in conduct A and B, which in my opinion, violates the Code of Conduct, LI 2423. Obviously, we know the way these things must be proved and how you must go through. I mean, in my own mind, let me tell you what. One of the things, for instance, that now if you know how the General Legal Counsel operates, it is made up of so many judges.
I know, I've been...
So one of the first things, when this thing happened, I was asking myself, how are they going to try this matter?
Exactly.
Because this allegation has been made against judges. Now, the JSC is made up of virtually so many judges and a few lawyers. So would the judges...
The disciplinary committee is presided over by a Supreme Court justice.
Yes, the disciplinary committee, you have a lawyer representing the lawyers.
Good.
Now, the Bar Association is the one condemning the gentleman. And then the judges who should be sitting there are the ones also condemning him publicly and filing. So what happens to the rule of natural justice that says that you cannot be a judge in your own
we
courts?
haven't read there. Because when they go, that's one of the first issues that has to be resolved. The composition of the panel that will determine this matter. Let's not say that because, the complaints made by judges, I mean, somehow a resolution will be found. Yes.
A point of information. Are you aware, and I know you are aware, that the General Legal Counsel has taken decisions in the past, presided over by the Chief Justice. And such decisions have been challenged in lower courts.
Yes.
And they've declared the act of the General Legal Counsel as illegal.
So is an example.
Including Sosu's case.
It has happened.
Yeah,
so it is possible when they get there, it is going to be based on evidence, not personal prejudices. But
what are they going to be investigating? What are they going to be investigating? He makes a statement. He says, if you do this, if you do that, what are you going to investigate?
I mean, they're going to look at that context.
I'll give you one.
I just wanted to give you two things quickly about this issue of political judges. I heard my brother
Kofi
Bento. You see, you may say that judges have political orientations, but at the same time, they have posterity to judge them. And that is always at the back of their minds.
They are human.
They are human, yes. Let me give you an example. You used the US extensively as an example, but I'm sure you forgot to just indicate that in the Watergate scandal, for example, when they had to constitute the justices to look at it, some appointments were made by the president. But when they returned a verdict of all justices against the president. So that mentality of saying that when you appoint somebody, he owes allegiance to you, in most cases will not work.
If he has to be views, my view is that if you're a judge,
yes,
and you are appointed,
yes,
and you still have to look back and think about what some politician would do, then you are even not worthy to be a judge.
So let's get back even to here in Ghana, 31st December. The justices who presided over the matter, all of them were appointed by Rawlings. He lost that case, 31st December. By, is it 5-4 majority or something? You know, he lost it.
Yeah, so let me hear him quickly. Do you still think this should be pursued in the
I believe so. For no reason at all. I could ask the simple question. Even if this were, like we said, mere allegations, is it the truth and the law that when a judge misbehaves or when a judge is unfit for his office, it takes another administration to remove him instead of when the
people are referencing what has Kweku Ansansare, what has he not said about judges? What has Samuel Kujeto not said about judges? What has Chachuch Keta not said about judges? What has he said?
No, Samson. You see, my little point is that I wanted him to be a little specific.
Okay, so
I wanted him to be a little specific.
Very unfortunate. I'm sure that we certainly had very limited time, and so we have not been able to exhaust this issue in the manner that we had anticipated. My guests have been Joseph Premka Dindiok and Kweku Yamwa Pencil. Kofi Bento was on the phone. I'm Samson Laye Yenini. Have a good afternoon. We'll see you again next week, God willing.